Hey everybody, welcome to my classic childhood VHS collection, part 2, where we look at the second row. So we got a lot of great classic movies to look at here, so let's get started. So we got the Aladdin trilogy right here. Now this is incredibly special to me. The original Aladdin. I absolutely love Aladdin. Aladdin is one of my favorite, I would say it's probably up there as one of my favorite movies of all time. It's a major classic. It's very funny. It has a lot of imagination. Interesting movie. I absolutely love Jafar. The voices in this film are amazing. It's just done so well. It's funny. And it had really fun action figures back in the day when I was a little kid. I thought that the remake I saw, the new one they made, was atrocious. I thought it was an abomination. Jesus. I mean, everything about visually about the tape itself is very colorful. Very colorful. Very 90s. Everything in the 90s was incredibly colorful. It was one of the big trends in the 90s. Everything is colorful. Very bright. We don't have that anymore. Iago was very funny. And that beginning with the giant lion head coming out of the desert sand. Oh my god, so fucking nostalgic. Rest in peace to Robin Williams. It's just a classic, and it's got really great music as well. Yeah, I don't know what else to say exactly, but it's just one of the best animated Disney movies. It's way up there with The Lion King, Hunchback of Notre Dame, all that kind of stuff. And I remember they actually had an Aladdin cartoon, a TV show of Aladdin that was animated, and that was on Toon Disney. It had all the original voices of all the characters, and it felt like a continuation of the Aladdin saga. All right, so now we take a look at the sequel. One of the greatest sequels of all time, The Return of Jafar. Jafar is one of my favorite villains. I absolutely love this movie. This is a great movie. It gets a lot of flack for some reason. Yeah, the animation is not as good as the original movie, but it's still great for what it is, though. Robin Williams and Disney were butting heads at the time for a bunch of reasons. But he did not voice Genie in The Return of Jafar. It was actually the voice of Homer Simpson in this film. But anyway, it's a good replacement, to be honest. I'm not trying to say anyone can voice Genie, but it is a good replacement. The way this is all done, this movie, is really awesome. It's a lot darker than the first movie, and it's extremely nostalgic to me. I believe, and I could be wrong, because this is one of the early 90s Disney's animated movies. This may have been the first direct-to-video sequel of all the animated movies they made, but it really didn't matter. It was done really well. Disney proved that they could make a great animated movie that wasn't in the movie theaters. So I think it was like a kind of a new idea, and that other companies can do it. And if you're a big fan of Aladdin, you know that there was a trilogy. That there was 3 movies. It wasn't just Aladdin. The stakes were really amped up in this one. Jafar turned into a red genie in this one. Really cool. And I think he did that in the first one, I believe. Yeah, Genie makes a joke about going to Disney World at the end of the movie. Or at the beginning. What can I say? It's another underrated 90s cartoon. Really only the big Aladdin fans talk about. It's a shame. I feel like it's on the same par as the original. The Star Wars trilogy is like the Aladdin trilogy. They're all great movies. This one is one of the best. Next, we have Aladdin and the King of Thieves. So, as you may have guessed, based on what it says, not guessed, but Robin Williams returned to be the voice of Genie. I believe he also did the voice of Genie in the animated series as well. This had to do with Aladdin's father. He was the main villain of the movie, I remember. And he had those claws and everything. This was a really, really cool movie. It was a perfect way to end the trilogy. Aladdin and Jasmine were getting married. The thieves interrupted their wedding. And this had the giant golden hand. I remember that. I remember it well. This is a major classic. People don't talk about The Return of Jafar or Aladdin and the King of Thieves that fondly, because either they don't remember how they felt when they watched it when they were children, or they didn't even know about it, and they just assume it's not as good as the original Aladdin. All of those things are not true. The sequels are great. This is another perfect example of Disney caring about their characters and their series. And Aladdin was huge. So they very much did want to take care of Aladdin, and they did. And they did a really great job with it. This was a classic. I'm very nostalgic about The King of Thieves. It's another underrated 90s movie. This came out way after the first two Aladdins. But they still kept things the same in terms of its quality. Alright, moving on. Oh, by the way, I thought I should mention, there's actually an episode of an Aladdin episode, I believe, where Aladdin actually teams up with Hercules, and both of their worlds cross each other. And it's very, very cool. I mean, it's amazing. I think it's on YouTube still, hopefully, so you can see that. Now that should have been its very own movie. Now, I don't remember if it was in the Hercules cartoon on TV or the Aladdin cartoon, but either or, it was awesome. Okay, moving on. Next we have a movie everyone knows, The Beauty and the Beast. Now this is the Platinum Edition, which came out way after the original 90s release on VHS. Another great movie. This movie is extremely nostalgic to me. I love all the other characters. I love Lumiere. I love Mrs. Potts. I love Chip. I love Clocksworth. I love them all. And the remake was pretty decent, because I adore Emma Watson. This film has really excellent music. It probably has one of the best soundtracks of all the animated Disney films. Now, this Platinum Edition, I believe, it includes a brand new scene with Clockwork here with the straw hat. And it was very funny. It was really awesome. And it's weird because when you look at the animation in that scene, it looks like it's a scene they completely animated back in the 90s when they first created the film. And almost as if they actually removed it from the final theatrical release. And then when they did the anniversary or whatever, when this came out in the early 2000s, like 2002 or 2001, something like that, they included that scene back into the film, which is really awesome. Chip was a great character. I mean, there were all great characters in this movie. Now, Beauty and the Beast also had a Christmas movie, which was really great. And they had one other film which was like them mostly singing in it, and it kind of didn't have too much of a plot. I love those ones as well. You know, thinking about Mario, I know I'm going off topic, not really. Mario, the stuff with Bowser and Peach kind of remind me of Beauty and the Beast. You know, he's like Bowser, Belle is Peach, and, you know, he's a beast, and whatever. He's got the horns and everything. I don't know, I just saw a connection with that. Anyway, you gotta love this movie. Oh, okay. Here it is. This was the one I was telling you about. The Enchanted Christmas. This was a Christmas movie, and it's extremely nostalgic to me. This is one of the most nostalgic cartoon movies to me. Not really, people don't really talk about this for some reason, but if you grew up in the 90s, if you're a 90s kid, and you're celebrating Christmas, give this another watch. And remember how you felt when you saw it back in the day. The little angel girl was really cool. The ornaments, everything. I would say it's probably one of the best Christmas movies ever made. It's unique, and it has a plot, and I think Belle and Beast have a fight in it, and then they get back together or something like that. I think Belle is trying to teach the Beast what Christmas is, and he's not used to something like that. I could be dead wrong about that, but for some reason that's in my memory. Yeah, great stuff. Really great stuff. So now we have Tarzan, the 1998 movie classic. Now, just like all the animated Disney films, the animals were really memorable, especially Turk, the ape. And this was, when you look at Tarzan, it's one of the last animated Disney masterpieces, 2D masterpieces. It's one of the last. And we're getting down to the last. This is one of the three that are the last. Now, there was, I believe, Tarzan 2, something like that. I think there was Tarzan and Jane. I remember seeing a little bit of those back in the day. For some reason, I don't find them as memorable as the original. Now, I remember seeing this in the movie theaters when it was a rainy day with my family. It's a very warm movie. It's very touching. It has excellent music. It's got really good romance. But you know something? It is pretty much a lot like... Actually, not a lot like. It's exactly the same as George of the Jungle. If any of you 90s kids grew up my time, if you remember that old Brendan Fraser movie, George of the Jungle, this is like an animated remake of George of the Jungle. The romance with the girl from the city, and she meets the wild man in the jungle. It's the same exact thing. And I actually saw George of the Jungle when I was a young kid, before Tarzan, because I was watching them in order as they came out, of course, obviously. And as a kid, I completely forgot George of the Jungle by the time this came out. I mean, George of the Jungle, I think, was in like the early 90s, and this was the very, like 1998, this movie. Now, George in this film, not George, Tarzan in this film, he slides on the vines in this film. And he does a lot of really cool, neat tricks with the vines, and it's like he's skateboarding on the vines. That's a very 90s skateboarding, X Games, Tony Hawk stuff going on there. It's very 90s stuff with all that. Also, if you play video games, Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, I'm a big Sonic fan. That video game came out in 2001 or 2002 for the Nintendo GameCube, and he grinds on the rails in that game. And Sonic does the same exact thing with the rails that Tarzan does with the vines. So it's like Sega took this that Tarzan does with the vines. It's like they took that idea from this Disney film, Tarzan, and had Sonic do it. But Tarzan did it first. I just know there's a strange connection with that for some reason. It's just some things I pick up on and notice. This film is very dark at times, and it has a lot of comedy, great animation. It's really funny. It's truly one of the greatest. Oh, and the soundtrack by Phil Collins. Phil Collins is pretty great if you listen to his music. And he provided like 3 big songs for this film. And each one of those songs is like a 5 out of 5 star song. And they play throughout this whole film. And his song plays when he's growing up as he's growing up, getting older. Then there's one that plays when he's a full grown adult. And then there's another one with the romance. And he provides the atmosphere for this film in such an excellent fashion. Phil Collins upped the ante and made this film an amazing movie and not just a great movie because of the soundtrack he added to this film. It might have the greatest soundtrack of all the Disney films because of Phil Collins, really. Now, Disney was always using celebrities to make songs for their animated features later on. They did it with The Lion King. I didn't mention this in the last video. They did it with The Lion King because Elton John provided the song Can You Feel the Love Tonight? Rosie O'Donnell was a really big celebrity in the 90s. She had her own talk show. I know this just came right out of nowhere, but she provided the voice for Turk in this film. And she does a great job. No one ever talks about Rosie O'Donnell really anymore. But everyone still talks about Tarzan. Another trend that Disney did was have famous actors do the voices for their cartoon characters in their movies. Because the hyenas in The Lion King were voiced by Whoopi Goldberg and Chris Rock, I think. I forget who the last hyena was doing the voice for. Anyway. Now, it's very appropriate these are next to each other, huh? Dinosaur. This is an early 2000s Disney film. This is one of the first 3D animated feature films. I saw this film in the movie theaters. This is a film that is like Casper. That is like the other movies I mentioned. James and the Giant Peach. Cats Don't Dance. Movies like that. People do not talk about this movie anymore. It was a hit when it came out, but it wasn't a giant hit. And you could tell it wanted to be because I remember seeing the promos on television every day when I came home from school. I saw this in the movie theaters with my family. It does kind of feel like it's riding off the success of Jurassic Park, which of course was huge in the 90s. And it was funny. It was clever. I did enjoy this film. There's plenty of romance in it. It is kind of like a 3D version of those movies with Littlefoot, The Land Before Time. For some reason, when people talk about the early 2000s animated 3D movies, the big hits, Monsters, Inc., Bugs Life, Shrek, no one ever talks about this movie. At the time, the title seemed pretty cool because dinosaurs were really big, like I mentioned. Jurassic Park, you had Yoshi, Barney, the dinosaur. Jurassic Park, dinosaurs were giant. Giant. Well, they were giant, but they were really huge in the 90s. Like I mentioned in my last review, the We're Back, A Dinosaur Story. So at the time, the title was... It was decent, I guess, for the time. It made sense. But the title doesn't lend itself to be a memorable title for a film you want to say to people you saw. Oh, I saw Aladdin. Oh, I saw Star Wars. Oh, I saw The Sound of Music. Oh, I saw Space Jam. Oh, did you see Dinosaur? What do you mean Dinosaur? I mean the Disney movie Dinosaur. It's like, you know, it didn't help it in the long run, I think. Never got a sequel. The 1998 Godzilla film came out, and this came out like 2 years later. So that also is a contributing factor to the whole dinosaur craze going on when this came out. The animation in this film, the way the dinosaurs look like the animation used on Godzilla in the 1998 movie, the early CGI. So I guess this film the animation in this film, the way the dinosaurs look, remind me of that '98 Godzilla film. And there were toys, I believe, at McDonald's. Oh, by the way, that's another thing I didn't mention in my first review or up to this point. Back in the day, it's not like today. Back in the day, McDonald's, especially McDonald's, but it was all the fast food chains. It was Burger King, Wendy's, but especially McDonald's. Always, always, always had toys for every single movie they came out. And back in the day, it was like year after year, bang, 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 bang. It's not like today we have to wait like 5 years for a new animated Disney film. These things were coming out year after year after year after year after year back in the 90s. No wait. There was no wait. Moving on. That's another underrated film. So, really, these three in a row are the underrated Disney trilogy, I would say. Moving on. Treasure Planet. This is an early 2000s classic. These are the early 2000s movies. A lot of these early 2000s movies are on my second shelf. This film is a fucking classic. I did see it in the movie theaters. They had toys at McDonald's that were really memorable. The animation in this film was amazing. It has a plot with this character that I don't want to give away the ending of. It was like a sci-fi pirate movie. Very cool. Kind of reminds you of Star Wars and Star Trek and all that. It's a film that there are a lot of people that do talk about this film. Way more than people talk about that Dinosaur movie. In the early 2000s, I believe that there was a trend. There was like a sci-fi boom going on in the early 2000s. Futuristic sci-fi future movies that came out. You got the Star Wars prequels. There was tons of stuff like that going on. 2000s to 2005. So, I love the ships they use in it. I think it had a PS1 game, if I remember correctly. You guys ever saw Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull? The ending in this film is kind of similar to that ending in that film with the treasure and everything. This movie kind of reminds me of Rayman 2: The Great Escape, the N64 and Dreamcast game and the PS1 game. I mean, they're both have to do with pirates and everything. Well, I mean, this is another underrated film. For some reason, people don't mention it when they mention the other Disney 2D classics. They always talk about Pocahontas, Snow White, Hercules, Lion King. This isn't mentioned with them. It's not as... I mean, it's classic. I think it is as much of a classic as the other ones. But I think I will say the characters in those other films I already mentioned are better than the characters in this film, I think. They're definitely better. But for the adventure, for the animation, for the music, for the inspiration the film gives you to take on the world, it's one of those great underrated Disney films. Never had a sequel. Oh. Next we have Atlantis. So, this is the original Atlantis movie. It had a sequel, and this film is similar to Treasure Planet. They're both mysterious adventure movies. They have great animation. This is the early 2000s once again. This is a really great movie. A lot of people do talk about this film. It is a lot like Stargate, the movie Stargate from the 90s. And that movie Stargate from the 90s had its own TV series. And I think it was called Stargate Atlantis, which is different than this Atlantis. But if you notice the logos for Stargate Atlantis, it has that same arch on the A's. Like the logos look the same, which is really weird. It was like confusing. It was like when I was a kid, it was like making me and my cousin or other people I knew think that this is like an animated version of Stargate Atlantis, but it's not. Anyway, you got the pyramids and everything. Very Illuminati, you know. Anyway, this film has a really great twist in it with the characters, and I won't give it away. But what's great about this twist is that it doesn't happen at the end. It happens in the middle of the film. which really throws you off. I know I just kind of ruined that, but I'm just trying to get you all excited to maybe see it yourselves if you haven't seen this film. So they had toys at McDonald's, I remember. Well, I think it may have had its own cartoon TV show. I can't remember anymore. I'm a little old. It may have, though. But this is a great film. Really great. And the whole mystery of Atlantis itself is a true mystery. The one that's fascinating, and it's almost as if this film was inspired by all that stuff they would air on the National Geographic Channel back in the early 2000s, and then actually taking those concepts and myths and mysteries in our culture and actually using it as a plot for, well, a Disney film. So, I'm sure you all have absolutely no idea what the hell this movie is. I've never even heard of this movie. Okay, I'm just kidding. Obviously. Toy Story is one of, probably, I would say it's one of the best movies ever made. It's a major classic, obviously. The original is a great film, and it's very tough for me to say this, but I do think the second Toy Story 2 may be better than the first Toy Story, but the first Toy Story is more nostalgic. I mean, the first two are very extremely nostalgic. But because the first one is much earlier, released in the decade, I think it is more nostalgic to people. Now, there's a million things I can say about this film, but one of them I'll say is that the clouds. I don't see anyone talking about this on the internet for some reason. Very strange. But in the 90s, cloud imagery with the blue sky, it was all over the place in the 90s. It was another popular trend, just like other popular trends I've mentioned in these videos. The Windows 95 wallpaper were the clouds in the sky, which you saw every day. They were always used on the Windows 95 computers in all the schools you went to. If you had it at home, Windows 95, which came out the same year this movie came out in 1995. So the clouds were all over the place. Andy's wallpaper were the clouds. The clouds introduced the film of the wallpaper of the clouds. What I want to mention about the cover of the film is if you go online and look up the poster, the original cover for Toy Story, Woody's face looks completely different. He's making a completely different facial expression in the original cover. In the original cover for Toy Story, Woody had a look of disdain on his face, and he was looking at Buzz like, who the hell do you think you are? Because, of course, they were rivals in the movie. But when they released the film on VHS, I believe the later copies of the tape changed Woody's face to being this, like, smile. They changed his face for the later releases of the VHS tape, which actually fit in with the plot of the film. The fact that they changed it doesn't make sense for the context of the film, because in this moment in the film is when Buzz is flying around as he leaps off Andy's bed. Woody is pissed off, and he's not friends with Buzz when this moment happens in the film, when Buzz is first introduced. So, really, the original poster is like a scene from the original film. So, the fact that they changed his face, it didn't make sense. I think they changed his face because for everyone who didn't see the film or wasn't familiar with it, they would have no idea why Woody would be making that face on the cover. So maybe they changed his face to make the film more marketable. Maybe they were overthinking it, that a lot of parents would look at this cover and see Woody's reaction be like that, and they were thinking, oh, is this an adult film? Is this not as child-friendly or as gleeful as we think it would have been? I don't know. Just trying to think of in the minds of the people who work at Disney. Well, what else can I say about Toy Story? The toys in this film, especially the walkie-talkie, the baby monitors, the RC car, the army men, the toy Andy uses as a mic, and those little early little kid computer toys. Back in the 90s, if you went into people's houses who had young kids, everybody had all those toys. So actually really just Toy Story 1, a lot of toys in this film are really super 90s toys. So it dates the first film a lot, which I love. So Toy Story is truly a nostalgic film because of the clouds, because of Windows 95, because of the toys, because of everything. Early CGI, and Sid was a great villain. There's a lot of interesting things you can say about this film in the realms of conspiracies, but we won't get into that in this video. I do believe that Buzz is based off of Buzz Aldrin, the man who supposedly landed on the moon, even though we didn't land on the moon. Great film, though. Yeah, a classic. Toy Story 2. I do believe that Toy Story 2 was released in 1999. So back in the day, when I went to the movie theaters, they had posters, of course, so they still do this, of movies before they come out. And this was right in the movie theater I went to when I was a kid, and I saw this and I couldn't believe it. Neither could anyone else. It was shocking. It was like, wow, Toy Story 2 is happening. It's actually happening. Toy Story 1 was in 1995. It was such a big movie. It was such a great movie that I'm sure there was a lot of people wondering if there was going to be a sequel. I mean, it was so big. They probably waited such a long time to do it because they wanted it to be really special. It's amazing. It's an amazing movie, I think. You get to see more of the origins of Buzz and Woody. The first Toy Story is actually more about Buzz, and the second Toy Story is more about Woody. And the new characters introduced in this film were really great. The Prospector, Jesse, Emperor Zurg, which was awesome. So since we're talking about Toy Story 2, I thought I'd show this off. This is my Emperor Zurg action figure. Of course, if you remember the movie, this is a replica of the actual box that the Zurg toy came out of in the film. So, it's really awesome.
So, we meet again, Buzz Lightyear, for the last time. I will defeat you, Space Ranger.
Obviously, Emperor Zurg is a parody of Darth Vader. They make a joke in the film about the whole "I'm your father" thing. Star Wars was coming back in a big way in 1999. It was the release of The Phantom Menace. So, it made sense that Star Wars was getting a parody now, with it being all big again.
Mark my words, you and Star Command will bow before me. I am the Emperor Zurg. Your insignificant threats don't frighten me, Lightyear.
Now, something else I want to say about Emperor Zurg is that I thought he was a really, really cool villain. I thought his design was really cool and his name was really cool. Even though he's played out as a joke in the film, if they made Zurg to be a serious villain, like say Jafar or something like that, or Scar from The Lion King, then he would be even cooler. So it's a little bit of a missed opportunity, I think, with Emperor Zurg. He still is very cool, though. Next movie, away from the cartoons, we have Max Keeble's Big Move. And this was a big movie when I was a kid. This is an early 2000s classic. And yep, there's Josh Peck, and this is before Drake and Josh. Now, for all you young kids out there, a lot of you don't know this, but Drake and Josh were actually a comedic duo before the TV show Drake and Josh. They were a duo like Abbott and Costello in The Amanda Show, which debuted, I think, in 1998, 1999. So by the time 2004 came out, when they got their own very own show, uh, us older kids like me already knew them as a comedic duo for years before they gave them their very own show. And this was from the early 2000s, so I believe this was still when he was on The Amanda Show. This movie is really, really funny. It actually kind of reminds me a lot of the Jimmy Neutron movie, which came out around the same time that this came out. Now, a lot of people look back at this movie with nostalgia about the music in it. There's certain songs they used all the time in live-action kids movies in the early 2000s, and they play a lot of certain songs in this film that you'll hear in other ones. Those are like totally songs from your childhood, of the early 2000s era. Now, another thing I want to mention is that some people missay the title of this film a lot. Some people think it's called Max Keeble's Big Movie, and no, it's Max Keeble's Big Move, because in the film, his parents want to move, and he doesn't want to move, and that's the whole plot of the film, and that's why the title is called that. So, and as you can tell from the cover and the background, there's a big food fight in this film, the biggest you'll ever see in any movie. It's really disgusting. It's a big, big show, and it's really amazing if you go watch that food fight again. But it's a very, very funny movie. Not enough people really talk about this movie anymore. It's too bad. Very nostalgic, though. Yep, it is a classic. Moving on, we have Monsters, Inc. Well, we all know this film. It's a classic. It's an amazing film. When they made Monsters U, or Monsters University, I really wish that they did a sequel instead, because that's way more appealing to me than seeing how they became what they became in this film. I want to see Mike Wazowski and his girlfriend, and them getting married and everything, and I want to see Boo grow up and everything. Billy Crystal and John Goodman are fantastic in this film. It's very funny. There's a scene in this film where the monsters first walk out from the doors, and they walk really slowly, and there's this like heroic music playing that's vaguely patriotic. As a kid, I didn't realize this, but that is actually a parody of the film Armageddon. Armageddon is a pretty good movie, but it's not a great movie. But for some reason, it was a giant hit. Anyway, the music in this film is pretty great. Roz was hilarious, the slug woman at the gate. Yeah, it's hilarious, this film. It's a major classic. Now, in the early 2000s, DVD was first introduced, and VHS didn't go away, but it was the new hit of the town, and VHS was slowly on its way out, and in 2005, I believe the final VHS tapes were released in 2005. Really, by 2003 and 2004, DVDs had become the new format to watch video. It's sad what happened to VHS. I still love VHS, as you can tell from these videos. But anyway, because it was the early 2000s, and the 3D animation was a big deal because it was new, the releases I noticed of the 3D animated movies of VHS, they made them look more special than the early releases. Most of the old releases, had the white tops. Sometimes they were black. Very rarely they were black. I believe the tape for Fantasia and The Nightmare Before Christmas was black. But most of them were white. But because this was a new 3D animated movie. They wanted to make the tape more special, so you can see that this one is all clear, which is really really cool. It's rare. Not many tapes did this. Now, if you open the tape up, it's got artwork in it, which is really awesome, and the tape is blue. Again, they used to do cool, fancy stuff like this with releases, video releases. They don't give a shit anymore. Very rarely they do. Some of the new Blu-ray releases have a nice tin case, but they don't give it enough kick though. Yeah, I took the tape out. You can see all their signatures near their characters, which is pretty cool. All making it seem like they're all in a play. And I remember at the end of the film, during the credits, they kind of do a play of the movie. So it does kind of remind me of the Looney Tunes, because they used to do those kind of jokes with the Looney Tunes, like they're in a movie within a movie. The relationship between Sully and Mike is kind of like between Buzz and Lightyear and Woody. It was like they wanted to do more of that duo idea. Now, I could be wrong, but I believe Monsters Inc. came out the same year that Shrek came out, in 2001, and that really kicked off this one of the biggest movie company rivalries of all time between DreamWorks and Disney, which did last for a good amount of years. Now that rivalry is very depleted because Disney has too much fucking money these days. And we gave it to them. Next, and this should really be next to Toy Story 2, Buzz Lightyear of Star Command. Remember how I mentioned in the last video the holographic stuff was a trend? Here you go, it's on this again. So, in the early 2000s, in the wake following Toy Story 2, Buzz Lightyear actually had his own cartoon, and it was on Toon Disney, I believe, and Disney Channel, I think. Tim Allen provided the voice for Buzz Lightyear, of course, once again, just like Robin Williams provided the voice for Genie in the Aladdin animated series. This is basically, I think, an hour long. It's the first episode of the show. So this is like the Buzz Lightyear of Star Command movie. It's a movie. And it's the beginning of the TV series. And the TV series introduced all these new Space Rangers to Buzz Lightyear's group. And they were pretty cool. Good stuff, good music. Very cool stuff. Remember they had some toys also. Very, very cool. Now Emperor Zurg is the villain in this film, of course. Now, in this show, Emperor Zurg acts very silly and comedic. At the time when I was a kid, I didn't like that. But now as an adult, I like it. I like it a lot because it fits in tone with how silly he acted in Toy Story 2, the movie. So, it works. I like it as an adult now. Yeah, so it's pretty cool. Maybe one day they'll make a live-action Buzz Lightyear movie. I think I heard rumors about that. But I came up with that idea first back in the day. And when I say back in the day, I don't mean the 2010s, I mean the 2000s I said that. So, Pooh's Grand Adventure, The Search for Christopher Robin. Pooh and the gang are really one of the most amazing group of cartoon characters that's ever been around. People treat them with reverence. They treasure them a lot, that group. Like how people adore groups of characters like the Muppets and the Looney Tunes. They're all great characters. We love them all. Now, Pooh had a bunch of movies. Now, he wound up having so many movies that it became hard to keep track of which one was what. And which one you saw and which one you didn't see. This movie is very nostalgic to me. I saw it back in the day. I watched Winnie the Pooh a lot at my grandma's house because she loved Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh is one of those characters that
you do remember watching it fondly with your grandparents a lot, going over their house in the 90s. Everybody's grandparents loved Winnie the Pooh, and when we were younger, we would watch them, you know. Even as you got older, past the little kid stage, you still liked Winnie the Pooh, even though you didn't want to totally admit that. But everybody loved him, so it kind of didn't matter. It was just accepted that Pooh was awesome, and so all the other characters, like Rabbit and Piglet, Tigger and everything, Eeyore. So in this film, Pooh is trying to find Christopher Robin, because Christopher Robin is missing. The plot is a big deal, and it's a great idea for the plot of a Pooh movie. This is one of the best Winnie the Pooh movies they ever made. And if you notice the Pooh movies that came out, the later ones were pretty. They were cheaper. They were still good, you know. They were decent, but the early Winnie the Pooh movies were great. They were way better in quality, animation-wise and story-wise. The first Winnie the Pooh movie is the best Winnie the Pooh movie, The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. I believe it's from the 70s, but when we watched it on VHS tapes, when they re-released them in the 90s, that was the first time us 90s kids watched Winnie the Pooh. The first time we watched that, of course, because we weren't alive in the 70s. And that movie became a 90s movie to us, the original first Winnie the Pooh movie. Now, this is not the first movie. This is, I think, the second or third movie. It's a great movie. Now, for all you who saw the new Christopher Robin movie that came out a year or two ago, I think that's a great movie. Really great. I recommend that movie for all you nostalgic 90s kids out there. And even if you didn't grow up in the 90s, Winnie the Pooh is a great series to get into. But that film, Christopher Robin, is definitely geared toward big fans of Winnie the Pooh. So you really should watch the cartoon before you watch that movie. But anyway, what I want to say is, looking back now, millions of years later, the Search for Christopher Robin movie is actually the same plot they used for that new Christopher Robin movie. In the new Christopher Robin movie, Pooh and the gang are trying to find Christopher Robin. Christopher Robin is an adult. He's not an adult in this film. He's a kid. But it's like they took the plot from this film and used it for that film. So it's like the new one is just a remake of The Search for Christopher Robin. Getting very nerdy for you there. So Winnie the Pooh had a lot of toys. They were very memorable. A lot of stuff in the Happy Meals with Winnie the Pooh. Yeah, so for all of you who haven't seen this film, if you're a new fan of Winnie the Pooh, you should definitely watch this film. This is one of the best Winnie the Pooh movies. And the animation is, of course, great. The Tigger movie. There's a million things I can say about this film, and I'm going to try. I remember when this came out, and it was a big deal. It was a big deal. Why? Because at the time this came out in the early 2000s, they didn't make a new Pooh movie in like a long time. So this was like the return of Winnie the Pooh series. But instead, they made the main theme of this film about Tigger instead of Pooh or Christopher Robin. And this is a very touching and warm movie. How Tigger is the only tiger. And it's it's extremely sad, this film. But it's very touching and it works. Everyone always loved Tigger back in the day. And it made sense that Tigger would get his own movie eventually, I suppose. So it was an excellent idea that they did this. It's very funny. Of all the Winnie the Pooh movies, The animation in this is the best they've ever done. It's actually, it's an improvement from the 90s animation. This film was released in movie theaters, which was the first Winnie the Pooh movie released in the movie theaters, aside from the original 70s movie. So this really was a big comeback for Winnie the Pooh and the gang. I remember Pooh and the rest of them were wearing Tigger outfits to make Tigger feel better and everything, and Owl was great in it. So after this movie, they released the Piglet movie, which wasn't as successful and it wasn't as good as this movie. Like, this movie is amazing. It's one of the best Winnie the Pooh movies ever. The Piglet movie was pretty good. It was good, but this was, like, way better. So when they made the Piglet movie, it was them trying to redo the success they had with this film. And it made everyone think, oh, well, okay. So now they're going to make new movies based on all the main characters of all the Winnie the Pooh characters. And I think because the Piglet movie wasn't as successful as the Tigger movie, they stopped doing that idea. But maybe they were trying to do that they were trying to do it for all of them. They were going to have a movie for Roo, for Rabbit, maybe. I noticed some connections between Winnie the Pooh and SpongeBob, actually. And I might be crazy, I might be wrong, but tell me what you guys think about it in the comments section. I think that Rabbit kind of reminds me of Squidward. How he's always getting angry at Pooh, and Pooh is basically SpongeBob because they're both yellow and they're both the main characters. The 100 Acre Woods is basically Bikini Bottom, just not under the sea. Piglet is Patrick because he's the main character's best friend and they're both pink. Now, Piglet acts nothing like Patrick, but Rabbit definitely acts like Squidward, doesn't he? The look of Squidward actually comes from that character from the Muppets, Sam the Eagle, and Bert from Sesame Street. Bert looks so much like Squidward if you compare them. A lot of people have noticed that. And it's like Bert acts a lot like Squidward also. So I guess Rabbit, Bert, and Sam the Eagle all were the inspiration to create Squidward. Or they're all the original Squidwards, and they ripped them off. But anyway. So, Tigger's the only one, right? But Roo has a connection with Tigger because of all the creatures in the 100 Acre Wood. The two of them are the most childish. And Tigger acts like a child even though he's an adult. And another reason why they both have a connection is because they're the only characters in the 100 Acre Wood that bounce. Come to think of it, it actually makes more sense that Roo would be bouncing around instead of Tigger, which is ironic because they always make out Tigger to be the highest bouncer in all of the 100 Acre Wood. But anyway, whatever. Don't matter. This ain't the Roo movie. This is the Tigger movie, damn it. Well, anyway, moving on. Next, we have a major classic coming in. We all know this one. A Goofy movie. This is one of the crown jewels of the 90s. This is an excellent, excellent, excellent movie. This is one of the best 90s movies. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. It's got great music. The artist power line in the film, I believe, is a Great Dane, because all the Goofy characters are based off of dogs. He is a combination of both Michael Jackson and Prince. His music is very catchy. The comedy in this film is really great. That's another thing about comedy, though. Back in the day, 90s kids movies had great comedy that adults can also enjoy. And they don't do that anymore in new animated movies. All the jokes now in the new animated movies are too childish. They're super, super lame, and they're shitty. Back in the day, they didn't do that shit, man. The jokes were meant for adults, and they were really funny for all ages, the jokes. But they just don't give a shit anymore. It's very sad. But anyway, there's so much I can say about this film, but it would take me hours on end. So, I guess one of the things, a couple of things I could say is a lot of people may not know, but there was a cartoon on TV called Goof Troop that came out before this film came out. And I think Goof Troop was the early version of Goofy movie. And it was like that show was building up to this movie, to that series being a movie. But the Goofy movie, is it winds up being memorable to people, and the Goof Troop show doesn't really become memorable to most people anyway. So the movie actually wound up being more famous than the show itself. The father-son storyline in this film kind of reminds me of the storyline in Space Jam. And it kind of reminds me of Bart and Homer in The Simpsons. And just in general, if you look at all of the 90s movies and TV shows, the father-son storyline dynamic was used all the time. That was another trend in the 90s. It being used here is another perfect example. And this is one of the best examples of it being used. So the animation in this movie is one of the best animated movies you'll ever see. The lighting is amazing. It blew my mind, the animation, as a kid, because if you look at the animation in this film, it's actually way better than a lot of the other early Disney movies. It's real up there. It has the same quality of animation that Space Jam has, actually, and this came out 1 year before Space Jam, I believe. Bigfoot was really funny. And by the way, this film was like a rebirth of the character of Goofy, who's been around since the 1940s. Well, really the 1930s. And this film is his rebirth. You'll notice that they give a lot more treatment to Donald and Goofy than Mickey Mouse. They all deserve stuff, but they always kept playing it too safe with Mickey Mouse, which I mentioned in the last episode, and I'm going to re-mention it here like I just did now, and then at the very end, because I got another Mickey tape at the end of this row. Yeah, so classic movie. There's Powerline. If you notice something about Powerline's outfit, for some reason it changes from green to yellow. Not sure what that's about. If you look at the soundtrack for this movie, his outfit's green. I mean, it's being worn by Maxie, but still, it's supposed to be based off of his outfit. But then in the movie, his outfit's yellow. But here in this cartoon, it's green. So it's like they kept changing the mind of the color of Powerline's outfit. Go listen to those Powerline songs, because even if you're not a fan of these kind of corny movies as an adult, you can appreciate that music, the Powerline soundtrack. He had 2 songs for the film, and it's too bad there wasn't more than 2, because they were really amazing. Throughout this film, there's little cameos of Mickey Mouse in it. A big movie because, not just because of all the reasons I just mentioned, but also because they were trying a new dynamic idea by having an offspring of one of the main Disney characters, giving Goofy a son. I mean, they did that with Donald and with Louie, Dewey, and Huey. But here it was done with Goofy. And they tried to do that a little bit with Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse, but it wasn't done as spectacular as it was with this and with Donald's nephews. A lot of care went into this movie with the animation. Pete is amazing in this film. For some reason, the character of Pete in the Mickey character's legacy doesn't really get talked about that much anymore. He doesn't get discussed or as much as Goofy or Donald or Mickey does anymore. Very strange. Back in my time, Pete was a very funny, memorable character, and they put him in a lot of stuff. The character of Pete kind of reminds you of Wario from the Mario games. And actually, Mickey Mouse and Mario kind of are similar characters as well. If you notice, they both wear overalls, and they're both always smiling all the time, and they're both, the very corny cartoon stars of both their respected things. Anyway, that's another side thing, but this movie is one of the saddest movies I've ever seen. The fight they have with the rain, all that kind of stuff, was really heartbreaking to see as a young boy. I gotta warn people for that, especially if you're gonna see this as a young kid now. Gotta tell you, it's gonna eat you alive. But I think that's something that's great about films, is that even if they make you uncomfortable, if they make you feel something, then the film has accomplished what it's trying to do. It's a sign of a great movie. The more a film makes you feel. I mean, depending on what it is, though. But that's a great example when it touches your feelings and you really feel something. Now, this is the sequel for a Goofy movie. I could be wrong, but for some reason I feel like this film gets a lot of slack these days. No idea why. This is a great movie. This is an extremely goofy movie. This is the early 2000s. It's not the 90s anymore. Maxie here is even more grown up. And he goes to college, and then Goofy goes to college with him. It's basically using the same plot as the first movie, but they change it up a little bit. Goofy, they show in this film that Goofy's a really great dancer, which is ironic because if you listen to the old 70s album, Disco Mickey Mouse, there's a song on it that makes fun of Goofy, and they say he can't dance. But then when they made this movie in the early 2000s, they did the opposite of that. They proved that he was a great dancer. So that was a character mistake that Disney made. Yeah, I think the song's called, that song from the 70s is called Watch Out for Goofy, if you look it up on YouTube. It's from the Disco Mickey Mouse soundtrack. Anyway, this is a great movie. I'm really going to tell you. Animation-wise, once again, it's really high up there. Now, I have a bit of a bias because I grew up in the 90s, but I actually think the animation in a Goofy movie from 1995 looks way better in animation than the early 2000s 2D animated movies. That's my opinion. It's like the Rugrats, the animation in the Rugrats movie, the animation in a Goofy movie, the animation in Space Jam, the animation in those type of movies, the animation in Pokemon the first movie. That stuff was the best animation ever. Visually, the shadows, the lighting, the colors. There was a lot of shadows and a lot of hard work that look way more impressive in this movie than in the sequel. I think they were getting lazier because it was the early 2000s. It wasn't the 90s anymore. But the animation is still great in this movie. This movie's very funny. There's some really kind of moments where it's a little cringy, where he's in college and it's very kind of angsty, and they have the whole thing with they're sipping lattes, and it's like Starbucks and everything, and it's like, okay, a little too thick with that. But the X Games were a big deal in the early 2000s when they came out. So the film does a parody of the X Games in it at the end. And I don't know. What else can I say? Great film. I didn't mention this with a Goofy movie, but Max's friends, PJ and I forget his name, but they're great in both films. Yep. So when they made that TV show in the early 2000s, The House of Mouse, what's really cool about that show is that they took Max's character from the Goofy movies and he's the same age in that show than that he is in this movie, where he's a young teenager. They kept that continuity going on, which was really, really cool. They didn't give up on it or didn't give a shit about it. They cared, and it was really awesome. Now, I wish they made movies like this for Mickey Mouse. They did do it for Mickey Mouse with Runaway Brain, but that was a short movie. Then they did it for The Prince and the Pauper, which is a really great movie. But they should have done it way more with Mickey Mouse and with Donald. And they didn't. They really just did. They really gave the greatest animation treatment of the movies to Goofy. More than Donald and Mickey Mouse. And it was awesome that they did that for Goofy. Because Goofy's awesome, but they should have kept making them. And they should have done it for Donald, and they should have done it for Mickey, and the rest. It's like it feels off kilter. Anyway, next movie, we have Recess, School's Out. Recess was a cartoon. It aired on Toon Disney back in the 90s. It was kind of like Disney's version of Hey Arnold. The show was very funny, very memorable, very relatable. Back when I was a kid, when they made cartoon shows on TV, they made a lot of them really relatable to my generation, being a young kid. The new cartoons don't do that at all. But anyway, Recess, School's Out. This is the movie they made for Recess. This is a great movie. It's very funny. By the way, Mikey in this film, who sings the song My Green Tambourine, is very catchy and memorable. But when I was a kid, I had no idea, I had no clue at all that song was actually just them doing their own cover version of an old 60s song called The Green Tambourine, or My Green Tambourine. So, from the title and the cover and everything, it's very angsty. This film does kind of remind me of Jimmy Neutron as well, and Max Keeble's Big Move, the whole rebellion stuff. I think I'm going to do a documentary about this. Back in my time, in the early 2000s, there was a whole kid revolution that they would show off in movies and things, and it made my generation think that there was going to be this kid revolution, and we were going to take over the adults. And that theme went on all the time. And they did it a lot. And it was really cool. And it was like uplifting as a child to see things like that. And we all thought that well, what happened? Was there a revolution? Did we win? Did we lose? What happened to the kids' revolution of the 90s and the early 2000s? What happened to it? Was it just a dream? I mean, I'm going to talk about that in a new documentary I'm going to make. Anyway, the movie's funny, and it has better animation in it than in the TV show, of course. It's funny. It's good stuff. The adults are very funny. Miss Finster is hilarious. One of the greatest 90s villains. And Randall was such a sneak. Good music in this too. Very memorable music for the film. The music in this film is very fitting for the time period that I grew up in. Oh yeah, this film also, and the show itself, Recess, reminds me so much of those computer games where you play sports, the backyard baseball games. The characters they seem similar to me visually, like the characters you see in those early Windows 95 and 98 computer games. And it was all going on at the same time. Yep, so great movie. Yeah, Recess just stopped. I don't think it really had a proper conclusion. If it did, I don't remember it. But Recess was really the greatest Disney Channel cartoon they ever made. It was way better than Lilo and Stitch and Kim Possible and everything else. So back in the day, the Recess cartoon on the Disney Channel in the early 2000s, it was the only one that was the best in quality, that had funny stuff and great stuff that you would see on Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon. It was the only one that could compare to those cartoons. It was like in the same league almost as SpongeBob, as Arnold, as Dexter's Laboratory, as Courage the Cowardly Dog, as Ed, Edd n Eddy. It was funny, and it was in that same league, but it was the only one that was able to do it, in my opinion. The Great Mouse Detective. This is a really, really great movie. It's not talked about. I mean, it is kind of talked about, but this is a classic. And the film kind of reminds me of that 60s cartoon called Danger Mouse. I mean, they're both mice and everything. But anyway, the animation in this film is amazing. I believe it's a film from the 80s, I think, or the early 90s, I think. So he's basically Sherlock Holmes, but a mouse. And the villain was pretty cool. Again, it's another underrated movie, though. Super underrated. They didn't make toys for it or anything. I mean, The Great Mouse Detective is one of the greatest Disney cartoon movies ever. And it's not talked about, really. Has a great story. I swear. Watch this movie. Of all the movies I showed off in my second row in this video, this one I recommend the highest because it's the rarest and it's one of the best. And it's because it's a movie that probably most of you watching this video haven't even seen. It really deserves more attention. The animation in this film and the fact that they're all little mice and everything reminds me so much of An American Tail. It really is so much like it, like visually and the style and the concepts of the mice. Back in the day, there were a lot of mice movies. Characters being mice. There was a lot of that going on. Near the end. So, here we got Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Now, remember in the last video I mentioned the villain was usually at the very top of the logo, hovering over the logo? This is another perfect example. When I was a kid and I saw this movie, I loved it, and I still do. However, I truly had no idea that this is the very first Disney cartoon. No clue whatsoever. None. And, I also had, I had a little bit of knowledge that it was older than the others. But this is a big thing I want to say is that you got to understand that for all of you who are confused about why someone my age knows so much about the early Disney films that weren't even released in my time period, why people my age are so nostalgic for the older ones, like for the it's because in the 90s Disney released the Masterpiece Collection, the Purple Label. And what they did with it was they put the Masterpiece Collection under their new movies from the 90s like Hercules and Lion King and Aladdin. But the Masterpiece Collection re-released the early Disney cartoon movies that haven't been released on tape in a million years. So it gave my generation the first time ever to experience these older movies. Like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is a film from the 1930s, but it's nostalgic to us 90s kids, people my age, because we watched it when we were kids. Because the Masterpiece Collection came out in the 90s, and everybody was watching Snow White, Cinderella, The Fox and the Hound, Peter Pan, all these older Disney films from the 60s and the 50s and the 30s and the 40s and stuff, like Fantasia and everything. So it became a 90s movie to us. And when I was a kid, like, all the movies just blended together. I had no idea that this was from the 1930s when I was a child. I couldn't tell. I knew the animation was different. That was a big obvious thing. But other than that, I really had no clue. So, what do I think of Snow White? Well, I think it's a good movie. It's pretty great. It's classic. It's got good music. The dwarfs are really memorable. It's got good visual appeal. So, leave a comment in the video if you remember what she says to the mirror. Now, as a kid, I remember her saying, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all." But, sorry to say, that's not in this film. In fact, she does not say that line in this film anymore. Look up the Mandela effect. I think this is a big Mandela effect. It's a huge one. By the way, for all of you who remember Shrek parodied the magic mirror from Snow White in it, because DreamWorks made a lot more adult jokes in their animated films than Disney, and it was considered edgier than Disney. So they took a lot of cheap shots, and they made fun of Disney movies that were popular and big. And that included making fun of Cinderella, making fun of Hunchback of Notre Dame, kind of, with Shrek and everything. Come to think of it, Shrek is kind of a ripoff of Hunchback of Notre Dame, isn't it? But anyway. And it makes fun of the mirror, Snow White and everything. But, again, holographic, look at that. Very cool. Final movie on the shelf. This is a movie based off of the House of Mouse cartoon. Mickey's House of Mouse Villains. This is a movie where the villains take over the House of Mouse. All the great Disney cartoon villains take over the restaurant that Mickey owns, where he's the head owner of it, and you got the others there. And it's a great movie. What I gotta say about the ending is really amazing. Check it out. Mickey Mouse fights Jafar. That's right. And Mickey is the wizard, and he fights Jafar. Which shocked everyone my age seeing that, because holy shit, you never thought you'd ever see that in animation. Now, I loved the Phantasmic shows they used to have at Disney World. That's very nostalgic to me. I used to see them when I was a young kid. I really loved those. I was a huge fan of it. Really inspired my imagination. And in those shows, Jafar fights Mickey all the time. But you never thought that you would see that in animated form. And here it is in this movie. I do think they took the idea from the Phantasmic shows and put that in this film. The fact that it's now, they made it into a cartoon, it's now locked in for time for generations to see that fight between Jafar and Mickey Mouse. Very cool, because Jafar and Mickey Mouse are both powerful wizards, so it makes sense, you know. The reputation of both of them, you know. And Donald is absolutely hilarious in this movie. Now, look at that. Isn't that amazing? All them facing off against them. With the moon in the background. Captain Hook. At the time, they actually had Happy Meal toys for the House of Mouse when they released this movie on VHS. It's just a VHS movie release, but I do believe they aired it on television as well. It kind of acted like a Halloween special. I believe this is a Halloween movie. So, and this is how I'll end the video with this really amazing piece of trivia that I discovered that you hear no one talk about. If you watch the beginning of this film, Mickey Mouse is dressed up as a vampire. He's got big teeth. Now, on this tape, he looks different than the original version of how he looked. Now, go on YouTube, because you might be able to find it. There's two versions of this film. One version, the intro, Mickey Mouse is dressed up as the vampire, and he looks really creepy. His face is darker, and he's got more shadows, and he looks a lot creepier. But on this tape, it's changed, and they took away the creepy parts of the vampire stuff of the animation of Mickey. And I hate the changes they made, because it just made him really look very bland. It was so cool to see him be all creepy at the beginning. I think they were thinking, well, whoa, we went a little too far. That's going to scare the young kiddies. He didn't look that creepy. He looked really cool. It wasn't like he was super scary or nothing, but they made him look really cool as a vampire Mickey Mouse at the beginning of this film. Then they altered it and they changed it for the later re-release when they released it on tape. Because I think this aired on television first on Disney Channel. Then when they released it on VHS, they changed, they went back into the original film and they changed the animation of Mickey Mouse being the vampire at the very beginning of the film. So now if you own the tape, you unfortunately own the crappy version of the way Mickey looks as a vampire, instead of the original version, which you might be able to still find on YouTube. And there is a difference. You can see it in the way they both look. And the original is really cool and far better than the stupid changes they made. I didn't like that they did that. So, in general, talking about the mouse, I would say that this is one of Mickey Mouse's best movies. It's a all-character Disney movie. But Mickey's name is in the title, and he does face off at Jafar at the end, and there's a build-up to that, and he is the owner of the clubs, and so it is a Mickey Mouse movie. Animation-wise, it's great. And all of us 90s kids now look back at the House of Mouse and wish we gave it more attention than we gave it at the time. I mean, we really liked it, but it would be great to... It would have been better if they had the House of Mouse... If they made the House of Mouse now, for us 90s kids, it would have been more fitting now than when it was back then. I mean, it was great they did it back then, but they should have brought it back, I think. Because, sadly, when you look at the House of Mouse, and it's very fitting, it's at the very end here of my second shelf. Sadly, when you look at the House of Mouse cartoon, it's the final time that all of the 2D animated characters from the 2D animated Disney movies, it's the final time where all of them were all 2D, and they all had the same voices, and they all interacted with one another. It's the final time they ever did that with all of them. That was it, man. That was the Big Bang. That was the true end of them doing that with all those original characters. Because after the House of Mouse era in the early 2000s, after they did this movie, that's it. You know, this movie is like the final, it's like the finale to all the long series of animated movies that Disney made with all the villains. It's the ultimate showdown. All the villains from all the big 90s Disney movies team up against the mouse. Of course, not all the villains are from the 90s, like Captain Hook's from the 60s, and you know. But most of them are from the 90s. Ursula, Hades, and Jafar from the 90s. Man, the 90s was the best, wasn't it? Shit, man. I'm probably going to miss the 90s forever, no matter how old I am. Anyway, leave a like, comment, and subscribe to see more. That was my second shelf of my fantastic childhood 90s and early 2000s VHS collection. I'm very proud of it. These movies mean a lot to me. And if you watched the whole video, I appreciate that so much. And if you did, you probably love these movies as much as I do. And I'm going to keep it coming. We're going to do the whole damn shelf. So, I love you guys. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and leave a like. And may the 90s be with you forever. Ciao.